faster. If climate warming continues at this pace, it might retreat slower. We don't know that absolutely for sure. But the fuse is already blown. The idea is still probably a little bit of a shock for some people in our community, but I've been looking at this area long enough to be quite sure about that.
I guess one area, so it's kind of a case of we know it's going to happen, we're not sure when. Would that be how you would characterize?
Yes. The time scale is the big issue. I think the community in general is very conservative with timescales. All the observations we've collected in the past decades are actually pointing towards shorter timescales than what the models are able to replicate. It's true for sea ice. The sea ice decay, most of the models are not able to replicate that. It's true for the decay of glaciers and ice sheets. They're going on a pace faster than what the models projected and faster than even the present-day models are able to replicate. So a lot of the changes we're witnessing, we actually don't have any reference in time to say we know how it happened in the past, we know at what pace these things can retreat. There's no example of that. All the records of collapse of marine ice sheets have been bulldozed by re-advance of the glaciers. So these records don't exist. We know how fast some of the land-terminating ice sheets can collapse, and they can collapse pretty fast. So the marine ice sheets, they probably can do it a lot faster. We probably are seeing that today in several parts of Antarctica and Greenland. But it's a little bit shattering to say, hey, this is it, right? Even for the scientists looking at it. It's kind of a big step to say, I think this place is falling apart.
How do we communicate this to the public?
I don't know, but we're not doing a good job at that. I think most of the scientists are not trained for that, so they'll be taken by surprise. They don't know how to deal with that very well. I'm trying to learn. I talk to people actually from digital media to ask them, how do we reach the people? You know, the feedback I get right now is you guys really suck at it. You're not doing it right. I can tell that you're not trained to do this. The message is not passing. You know, you talk about these things like, oh, yeah, business as usual, this glacier is falling apart, West Antarctica is going to be in an irreversible state of retreat. And the people who listen to that may not click. They feel like, well, it doesn't seem so shattered by this, so why should I worry about it? Right? We should be a little bit more vocal and direct about these things. You have somehow to take your scientist hat off and take a different hat to communicate that. You cannot communicate to the public the same way you communicate to your colleagues. It has to be a different level of communication.
It is possible that you push something very gradually and suddenly it hits stuff that we care about. Either the storm surge is just below the levee in New Orleans and people living in New Orleans go about their business, or it's just above the levee in New Orleans, and people in New Orleans are very, very unhappy about that. And a very gradual change in sea level, if we don't respond to it, can lead to an abrupt change with the water is in the city or it's in the subways of New York or what have you. And we have a lot of things that we've built that may be vulnerable to a gradual change, pushing them over a threshold and causing an abrupt issue for us.
Today, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is above 400 parts per million, a level not seen any time in the history of human life on Earth.
We are increasing CO2 levels in the atmosphere at rates far greater than any of the most rapid events that happened in the deep geological past. There is no precedent for what we are doing to the atmosphere. It is an uncontrolled experiment.
As you warm the environment, that causes the release of more carbon, which is either methane or carbon dioxide, into the atmosphere. That in turn increases the rate of warming, which releases even more carbon. And you can see how this begins to cause a so-called positive feedback, or just an ever-increasing amount of heating.
At the end of 2012, the World Bank issued a report warning governments around the world that a 5-degree temperature increase is likely unless drastic action is taken to curb carbon emissions. And a 6-degree increase was, according to some scientists, all it took to pass a tipping point during the Permian mass extinction.
In fact, the last time that ice sheets disintegrated was 14,000 years ago. Sea level went up 20 meters in 400 years. So that's 1 meter every 20 years, 5 meters a century. And that would be incredibly disastrous.
Is it possible that we have overestimated the dangers? Is it possible to be a little better? Sure. Is it possible to be a little worse? Sure. Is it possible that CO2 breaks things that we really care about and things are a lot worse than we expect? Yes, it is.
Dar Jamail is on the line with us. He's the investigative journalist and staff writer with Truthout, truthout.org. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Tom. Good to be with you.
Great to have you.
Geologic, because, you know, what you mentioned earlier about abrupt climate change, Paul Beckwith, who's a climatology and meteorology professor and a specialist in paleoclimatological records at University of Ottawa in Canada, he said, look, we are looking at, he says we are already in the very beginning stages of what he calls abrupt climate change, where we could look at that 5 to 6 degrees C that we've been talking about from methane or from other factors. He said we could be looking at that in the next 10 to 20 years. But that said, what's also interesting is talking about abrupt climate change is even the International Energy Agency, which is a conservative, very conservative energy agency, their most recent predictions are calling for a possible 5 to 6 degrees C global temperature increase by 2050. So we're starting to see now a trend where the abrupt climate change predictions and even conservative predictions from a group like the International Energy Agency.
The World Bank is saying it now, too.
Them too are all kind of starting to coalesce, and so now what's being left in the dust is the worst case predictions for the International Panel on Climate Change, calling for a maximum 5C increase by 2100. They're being left in the dust.
Yeah, absolutely. This is serious stuff.
The reason we haven't seen as much action as we should on climate change is there is a very successful, well-done, and well-funded contrarian campaign to discredit science, to highlight uncertainties, to delay action. And the companies doing this are, of course, the oil companies and the coal companies. Rich industries in the past, whenever they've been threatened due to scientific findings that say their product is dangerous, will launch PR campaigns to try and minimize the danger, delay action, and so on. We saw this with the tobacco companies, the asbestos industry, the chlorofluorocarbon industry when the ozone hole was found. And some of these same PR firms and some of these same scientists that were involved in those campaigns are now working on behalf of the oil companies to delay action. And they've been very successful. They're very good at it.
Like so many of us, I saw his film An Inconvenient Truth about the impacts of global warming, and it scared the emojis out of me. In Al Gore's film, he describes how our Earth is in peril. Climate change stands to affect all life on this planet. From monster storms, raging wildfires, record droughts, ice caps melting, acidification of the oceans, to entire countries going underwater. That could all be caused by humans' demands on the Earth. With scientists warning unless we take drastic measures to correct our environmental footprint, our time on this planet may be limited to only 50 more years. I wanted to do everything I could to help. I made up my mind right then and there to change how I lived and to do whatever I possibly could to find a way for all of us to live together, in balance with the planet sustainably forever. I became an OCE, Obsessive Compulsive Environmentalist. I separated the trash and recycling. I composted, changed all the light bulbs, took short showers, turned the water off when I brushed my teeth, turned off lights when leaving a room, and rode my bike instead of driving everywhere. But as the years went by, it seemed as if things were getting worse. I had to wonder, with all the continuing ecological crisis facing the planet, even if every single one of us adopted these conservation habits, was this really going to be enough to save the world? It just seemed that there was something more to the story. I thought I was doing everything I could to help the planet. But then, with one friend's post, everything changed. The Post sent me to a report online published by the United Nations stating that cows produce more greenhouse gases than the entire transportation sector. This means that raising cattle produces more greenhouse gases than all cars, trucks, trains, boats, planes combined, 13% compared to 18% for livestock. This is because cows produce a substantial amount of methane from their digestive process. Methane gas from livestock is 25 to 100 times more destructive than carbon dioxide from vehicles. Here, I'd been riding my bike everywhere to help reduce emissions, but it turns out there's more to climate change than just fossil fuels. I started doing more research. The UN, along with other agencies, reported that not only did livestock play a major role in global warming, it is also the leading cause of resource consumption and environmental degradation destroying the planet today. How is it possible I wasn't aware of this? I thought this information would be plastered everywhere in the environmental community. I went to the nation's largest environmental organizations' websites, 350.org, Greenpeace, Sierra Club, Climate Reality, Rainforest Action Network, Amazon Watch, and was shocked to see they had virtually nothing on animal agriculture. What was going on? Why would they not have this information on there? It seemed the main focus for many of these groups was natural gas and oil production, with fracking being the latest hot issue due to water usage and contamination. Hydraulic fracturing for natural gas uses an incredible amount of water. A staggering 100 billion gallons of water is used every year in the United States. But when I compared this with animal agriculture, raising livestock just in the US consumes 34 trillion gallons of water. And it turns out the methane emissions from both industries are nearly equal. Living in California, a state plagued by drought and water shortages, water use is a major concern for many of us.
The average Californian uses about 1,500 gallons per person per day. About half of that is related to the consumption of meat and dairy products. So meat and dairy products are incredibly water intensive, in part because the animals are using very water intensive grains. That's what they eat. And so all of the water embedded in the grain and that the animal eats essentially is considered part of the virtual water footprint of that product.
I found out that 1/4 pound hamburger requires over 660 gallons of water to produce. Here I've been taking these short showers trying to save water, and to find out just eating one hamburger is the equivalent of showering 2 entire months. So much attention is given to lowering our home water use, yet domestic water use is only 5% of what is consumed in the US versus 55% for animal agriculture. That's because it takes upwards of 2,500 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of beef. Perhaps the only other ecosystem that is being destroyed at such a rapid rate are the world's rainforests. Our global rainforests are essentially the planet's lungs. They breathe in CO2 and exhale oxygen. An acre of rainforest is cleared every second, and the leading cause is to graze animals and grow their feed crops. That is essentially an entire football field cleared every single second. And it is estimated that every day, close to 100 plant, animal, and insect species are lost due to rainforest destruction.
Hey, sorry we didn't get back to you earlier. I have some bad news. Unfortunately, we are no longer able to fund your film project. We had a meeting, and due to the growing controversial subject matter, we have some concerns and have to pull out.
Why was this subject so controversial? The first person I could think to speak with was Howard Lyman, who had been sued by cattlemen for simply speaking the truth about animal agriculture on the Oprah Winfrey Show.
I was born on the largest dairy farm in the state of Montana in 1938. Grew up my entire life on a livestock farm. Went to Montana State University, got a degree in agriculture. Came back and started a mega agriculture endeavor where I had 10,000 acres of crop, 7,000 head of cattle, and about 30 employees. So I spent 45 years of my life in animal agriculture, and so I've been there, done that. When I was on the Oprah Show, we had the food disparagement law. Now, the food disparagement law, in my opinion, was unconstitutional, but what it basically said, that it was against the law to say something you knew to be false about a perishable commodity. I didn't say anything on the Oprah show I thought to be false. I went there and told the truth. Now, it took 5 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars to end up extricating myself from the suits from the cattle industry. But if I was to go on the Oprah show today, say exactly the same thing today that I said back then, I would be guilty. And for me, when they were talking about the food disparagement law, it was the fact of whether I told the truth or not. You can go today and tell the truth, and you will be guilty, because if you cause a disruption in the profits of the animal industry, you're guilty under the Patriot Act.
Anything we can do to slow down carbon dioxide emissions is going to help some. As I said in the beginning, though, we've already put so much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and that carbon dioxide lives a long time in the atmosphere. So even if we could stop completely now, we're still looking at a lot more change coming our way. So, but I still, that's kind of a gloomy, a gloomy outlook. But that said, anything we can do to slow down additional emissions is worth doing.
The only way to really prevent the permafrost carbon feedback from starting is to reduce fossil fuel emissions. And I think that is the key. Your viewers, if they walk away with the idea we must reduce fossil fuel emissions, and just so, not to sugarcoat it or anything, but we really have to reduce it by 80 or 90%.
We can't wait for perfect knowledge of what those thresholds are. So one of the things we do, that's why we do many forecasts with different assumptions, to sort of show the spread of the outcomes. And that enables you to say, now, if I stabilize it at levels not too much greater than what we have today for greenhouse gases, that you lower the risk, particularly of very large amounts of warming in the Arctic region. And it's dramatic to see, what the lowering of the risk is. And we need to start that now. We can't wait until the researchers say, we've finally pinned down exactly what the threshold is. I think by the time that happens, with great accuracy, again, we will have been building up the greenhouse gases to higher and higher levels in the meantime. So I think we've got to go on both fronts. We need to move to mitigation by lowering greenhouse gas emissions, and we need to continue the research to understand more and more at what levels of warming do you get these dangerous outcomes for not just for the local regions, but for the planet as a whole.
When I learned about the activists being killed in Brazil, I was disturbed, but I felt removed. But to learn about American activists and journalists being targeted by the industry and FBI, my funding being dropped, I was genuinely worried, and it hit close to home. Was this why no one was willing to talk about the issue? I decided to take precautionary measures with all the footage I shot. I was beyond frightened to imagine what could possibly happen if I pursued this subject any further. It seemed the only decision to make was to put down the cameras and walk away. But then, I realized this issue was way bigger than any personal concern I could ever have for myself. This was about all life on Earth hanging in the balance of our actions, and that you either live for something or die for nothing. And I actually had no choice all along. I decided then to surrender not to fear from a secret, but rather to a cause towards truth. I couldn't be like these environmental organizations and sit silently while the planet was being eaten alive right in front of our eyes. I had to stand up and continue on.
Do you realize that 75% of Americans consider themselves to be environmentalists? You don't think we couldn't solve this problem in a heartbeat? I'll tell you what, all we would need is for the environmentalists to live what they profess, and we'd be on a new course in the world. Do what you can do as well as you can do it every day of your life, and you will end up dying one of the happiest individuals that ever died.
This is about massively transforming how our society eats because it's a necessity.
It's acting on what we know and acting kindly and gently on the whole planet and with other people to accomplish the goals of living better. We can do it, but we have to choose to do it.
You can change the world. You must change the world.